Welcome to the Moss Adams presentation, IT You Can Use, Third-Party Cloud Risks. Before we get started, we have a few housekeeping items that will improve your participation.
Moss Adams is pleased to present another in our ongoing series of continuing professional education webcasts. Our presentation will start in a few moments. Before we begin, here are a few things to keep in mind. You can customize both how you view our presentation and how you interact with the presenter. For better viewing, close all other applications and turn up your speaker volume. You can also adjust window size and placement. At the bottom of your screen, you'll see a series of icons, each relating to a different aspect of our session. For example, you can click the file folder icon to download the group attendance sheet and a PDF copy of today's slides. You can ask our presenter questions during the webcast by clicking Q&A in the bottom left-hand portion of the icon bar and typing in your question. We'll do our best to answer all questions during the presentation or follow up via email. If you experience technical difficulty during today's presentation, refresh your browser by hitting the F5 key. We'll ask polling questions throughout today's presentation. Per the National Association of State Boards of Accountancy Webcast CPE standards, CPE credit will be awarded based on your participation in these polls. To respond to a poll, click the button next to your answer. If you're attending this webcast in a group, in order to receive CPE credit, you must complete our attendance sheet, available in the file folder icon at the bottom of your screen. Please have all group members sign the sheet, and please remit only one sheet per group. Also note, today's session will offer you 1 CPE credit. To receive credit, you must meet the requirements as specified by the National Association of State Boards of Accountancy. CPE credit can be awarded only to participants registered as themselves and is not available to participants who view the on-demand version. We'll track your progress and alert you when you've earned CPE credit. You can then click the certificate icon to open a PDF file you can save to your computer. We'll email a copy of your PDF certificate in 2 weeks if you can't download it today. As a reminder, the presentation you're about to see is not legal, investment, or accounting advice. We encourage you to seek the counsel of a professional service provider to apply this content to your specific circumstances.
Presenting today is Brandon Gunter. Brandon has provided IT consulting services since 1997. He initiates cross-functional technology solutions and drives information security improvements, security program enhancements, and risk management programs for clients across multiple industries. Prior to joining Moss Adams, Brandon worked at a Big Four firm where he worked in cyber risk services and specialized in identity and access management implementation and assessment. Also presenting is Troy Hawes. Troy's been providing IT consulting services since 2001. Troy has extensive experience managing and leading technology security and compliance assessments using a number of different security frameworks. He has extensive experience managing and leading IT security audits and assessments, IT co-sourcing, and system and organization control audits, among his many skills. Troy frequently leverages his security expertise to help clients determine areas of potential security weakness and infrastructure needs. Joining us today as our moderator is Kevin Villanueva. Kevin has been in the information technology field since 1997 and leads the firm's IT, infrastructure, and cybersecurity practice, and has served as technical counsel on hundreds of technology security projects. Thank you for agreeing to address third-party risks in the cloud today, gentlemen. Brandon, I'll turn the presentation over to you.
Thank you, Tanya. I appreciate everyone that has joined today. Hopefully we can have an informative discussion around the third-party risks, especially risks of moving into the cloud and how these have evolved over the years. As many of you know, this topic has been addressed, discussed, and reiterated several times for most of us over the years. The migration to the cloud for most of us is not a new thing. This is something that's been going on for the last 6-7 years. And one of the things that we've come to find as we've worked with our clients is not a lot of clients have figured out exactly how to manage their risks as it relates to migrating applications to the cloud as it relates to how do we ensure that the security policies and guidelines that we establish for our own data that's on-premise are also secured to that same manner as we move to the cloud. Hopefully on your screen you see a slide, and the slide's from a recent survey performed by the RightScale group. This is their 6th annual survey, and what they've done is they've surveyed over 1,000 companies and talked to them about what their usage of the cloud looks like. As you see, 95% of the organizations surveyed were running or experimenting with infrastructure as a service. We'll talk a little bit more about infrastructure as a service as we go forward, but that's a very large number if you think of the mid-range organizations, the very large-scale companies, 95%. And so this migration is really, truly taking hold and gripping like nobody really thought 6-7 years ago. And 85% have a multi-cloud strategy, meaning that they have some sort of public cloud, some sort of private cloud, or a hybrid of those two, which is a big deal because that introduces the numbers that increases the number of risk points that we have when we look at third-party cloud providers. And some of the numbers that were interesting to me as I was looking at this survey were the amount of workloads in the public cloud. 41% are looking to migrate additional workloads into the public cloud, and 38% already have stuff in private clouds. And so when we look at workloads, we look at the processing of data processing, not just storage or hosting a web application, but actually doing processing and application functionality in the cloud. So very interesting figures if you look at a little bit behind the detail. You think of organizations such as AWS for Amazon Web Services, Microsoft Azure, Salesforce being some of the large public cloud entities. They're really seeing an uptick in usage from the companies, and to meet that demand, we'll see and we'll talk about later on how some of these organizations have put together information using various industry standards to help gain assurance around the security and the availability of data. With that, I wanted to talk a little bit about the course objectives and some of the things that we wanted to cover in today's presentation. First of all, we want to get a little bit of an understanding of the fundamental risks of shifting information and services to the cloud and looking at other third-party platforms such as co-location facilities or private clouds that organizations have, and talk about these risks and how they've shifted over the years and who needs to pick up the responsibility for risk mitigation. We'll talk a little bit about how this shift in risk and responsibility, what it means to your organization, right? What are the impacts? Who needs to pick up the ball and take a look at how we as an organization or as an enterprise deal with this from a risk management perspective. Thirdly, we'll take a look at the role of cybersecurity specific within the organization. Over the years, as this migration to the cloud has continued, the role of cybersecurity has changed from more of an on-premise mentality to how do we enhance our security over data and privacy over data as we move this information to the cloud to become more efficient. And so we'll talk about the impact of vendor management and vendor management programs. We'll talk about the impact of legal teams and what role they play in mitigation of this risk. And then lastly, we'll talk about some of the key steps that you can take as an organization that help reduce your exposure to these risks over time. In order to do so, we need to take a step back and talk a little bit more specific about the types of cloud computing. Most of us in the industry, I assume most of you have heard of all these terms that we're going to talk about, but it's important to set a baseline for the discussion. When we look at things like software as a service or platform as a service, right, we have to understand what exactly the boundaries of that from a technological standpoint are, so we can understand who mitigates the risk and who owns what areas of risk. So from a software as a service perspective, software is a licensing delivery model which software is licensed subscription basis and is centrally hosted. It's a complete package of services, right? These are applications that you contract with a third party to simply access over the web. An example I commonly see is a disaster recovery application where organizations continually update and manage their business continuity planning through a cloud-based application, right? This allows them to move everything up to the cloud so that in the event of a serious business continuity issue, they're able to access this without having to look at their on-prem functionality. This is great from a functionality perspective, but now you've put company confidential information up in this cloud. Now the boundaries typically for software as a service is once you have access to the software, you simply have the ability to manage your security, manage your users within that application, and sometimes not even that. But as we move towards platform as a service, platforms being things like databases and web servers and other pieces of infrastructure that are established and managed by a third party, our responsibility to manage risk and security grows, because now we own the database as opposed to just simply owning the front of the application or the front door of the application and the application management. Now we own the databases behind it. We own the web servers behind it. We may even own parts of the underlying operating systems for the virtual machines that these are on. And so our risk now has grown. And as we move into infrastructure as a service, now we own all of the infrastructure that the cloud service provider has granted us. The cloud service provider provides a fabric for us to create and manage our own virtual devices, i.e. our own infrastructure. But with that comes the risk. And some of those risks are similar to the risks that we feel from an on-premise data center, things such as patch management and change management. But these also play into what we have to think about from a risk mitigation strategy. Lastly, we have other vendors. And there's vendors such as co-location facilities of all types and of all breadths. These co-location facilities may be, we simply have a cage, and it's our hardware, it's our platform, but others provide us the hardware, provide us the platform. And so understanding what the boundaries of our technology management are and where our role stops as an organization and the third party's risk mitigation procedures take over is critical to this discussion. To make matters just a little bit worse, to make them just a little bit more muddy, considering my muddy water graphic there, when we look at technology service providers, there's a variety with the advent of many different types of cloud-based applications, private cloud, software as a service using major cloud service providers. There's a variety of combinations of services that can be offered. For example, in my earlier analogy, using a business continuity web-based application, this application may be created by an application development team. That application development team or company that provides this software may host the software in-house on their own private cloud. They may use a public cloud such as Amazon Web Services or Microsoft Azure to host it, or Salesforce to host it. They may have some other arrangement with a co-location facility to host it. And so we begin to have not only the third parties, but also fourth parties involved in our risk mitigation strategy. And so we need to think about this combination, and when we move into looking at all of our cloud-based applications and our cloud-based functionality from a IT security, from an IT professional perspective, from a vendor management perspective, we need to understand these boundaries. And that leads us into our first polling question.
Okay, thanks, Brandon. So poll number 1, which statement is true? Microsoft Azure is an example of software as a service. Google Mail and Salesforce are examples of software as a service. Amazon Web Services is an example of platform as a service. All of the above or none of the above. So I'll give you a few seconds to submit your answer. Okay. So let's look at the results. Looks like we have all of the above as the majority. Actually, the answer is B. Google Mail and Salesforce are examples of software as a service, or SaaS. 16.9% of you answered correctly there. AWS, or Amazon Web Services, that's actually an example of infrastructure as a service because they provide the virtual infrastructure that many of our applications and database platforms sit on. Azure, Microsoft Azure, is actually an example of platform as a service. I think about their SQL Server or SQL Server database or their SharePoint platforms that they usually offer for development. And so that is actually a platform as a service. So again, the correct answer is Google Mail and Salesforce. Those are examples of software as a service. So with that, I'll turn it over to Troy.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. So now that we've kind of obtained a background on cloud services, let's discuss third-party risk management or vendor risk management, which is the process of analyzing and controlling risks presented to your company, your data, your operations, and your finances by others than your own company. There are several types of risks to an organization from the introduction of a third party. While not an exhaustive list, some of these risks are presented on the right of the slide. For example, there are a number of risks around information security, such as the third party not providing not enough adequate controls to protect and secure data. Or another risk area is the introduction of shadow IT, which are basically technology systems and solutions used by departments without explicit organizational approval. This is due to the fact that cloud solutions are easy to implement. An example that we regularly see in the security risk assessments that we perform are departments using file sharing apps, excuse me, like Dropbox or Box.com, that IT or information security doesn't even know are being used. So there are risks that these solutions may not have the security controls needed to protect the information stored within them. Financial is another great example of a risk area, especially if the third party performs a critical function or operation within your organization. For example, a third party that stores, accesses, transmits, or performs transactions on sensitive customer information could mean significant loss of revenue if their system is unavailable or if it's breached. An example of regulatory compliance is the risks arising from violations of laws, rules, or regulations, or from non-compliance with internal policies or procedures. For example, merchants that take payment cards are subject to the payment card industry regulations, healthcare organizations to HIPAA, and financial institutions to FDIC. And all of these have a regulatory compliance piece that the providers need to show and prove that they're in place. There's also brand or reputational risks arising from like negative public opinion, third-party relationships that result in unsatisfied customers or security breaches resulting in the disclosure of customer information, or violations of law and regulations are all examples that could harm the reputation of your organization. So part of our risk evaluation and risk management process is ensuring that we, as the organization, have done our due diligence on the third party. Basically, due diligence is an investigative task to determine if a third party or cloud-based service provider is able to meet your business, regulatory, and strategic requirements. And due diligence is not done once, but it's an ongoing process throughout the vendor management lifecycle that includes reviewing, monitoring, and management oversight of the vendor. And we'll talk more about this later in the webcast. So there's several areas of concern specific to cloud when it comes to third-party risk management. And multi-tenancy is one of those concerns. Multi-tenancy is where enterprises share storage and compute resources with other customers of that provider. Good examples that have already been mentioned are Amazon and Microsoft solutions. Because all the data is stored on the same hardware of that provider, the logical controls on that data must not allow any opportunity to view another customer's data. Also, there needs to be controls to ensure that excessive network traffic from one customer does not affect access to your data and systems. For IaaS solutions, the cloud providers must ensure separation of customers' virtual machines at the hypervisor level. You should request information from your provider how this separation is being achieved, because they can really provide that information. For SaaS solutions, database and data segmentation is key. Also, data encryption at rest is important with these solutions. Encryption makes it difficult for hackers to access this data if the database itself is stolen or breached. These virtualized environments make it difficult from an end user perspective as well as from a provider's perspective. Users of these environments need to maintain the patches and security of the systems, and the providers need to maintain the security of the underlying hardware and software that supports these virtual systems. This means that there are different tools used to maintain these systems, and you'll want to ensure that the providers are have good systems in place to patch and regularly secure these systems. You'll also want to ensure that the providers have good availability statistics for the uptime of their systems, and that maintenance windows are defined so that as a user of their system, you'll know when that application or system may be unavailable. These types of environments make it difficult to confirm that the system is actually functioning, as it doesn't provide the physical indication that is operational, such as the blinking lights we would see in a physical server. SaaS applications have their own concerns. One major concern that we've already discussed is the fact that it can be easily used by end users. This is where risks lie, as the end user may not set the security controls required to adequately protect the information stored in the application. Other issues also include the inability to customize the application to meet the needs of the organization. Availability of the application is another concern. You want it to be available when you need it. SaaS vendors will typically agree to make the application available and accessible at least 99.5% of the time on a 24/7/365 basis. But these are always subject to certain exceptions, such as routine maintenance and internet outages. So who owns these risks? We have a number of risk owners and roles, and starting with information security, they're really responsible for identifying, helping the organization mitigate, monitor, and contain security risks. Information security will create policies and procedures that are followed by users of the cloud system. Purchasing, vendor management, legal, they're all responsible for establishing the contracts with the third parties. And those contracts need to clearly outline the risks and roles and responsibilities for risk management, such as security incidents and data breach. Purchasing and legal need to ensure that that new providers are vetted appropriately before they are used. Then there's actually the cloud or third party. They're actually responsible for fulfilling their role for risk mitigation, risk management, pursuant to the contract that has been established. The compliance piece, they are responsible for ensuring that contracts and procedures are compliant with established organizational policies and procedures, as well as regulated compliance, such as the payment card industry or HIPAA, as we mentioned previously. Compliance role will perform assessments or audits against the cloud provider to ensure that controls are operating effectively to secure the systems. It's important to have a right to audit clause in your contracts in the event you want to perform your own assessments of the cloud provider. Information technology's role is really responsible for the limited implementation of security and application administration, and so are the data and business owners. They're really responsible for setting up some of the security functionality within these systems. IT and data process owners will need to follow the policies and implement security controls in order to protect these systems. I'd say the biggest takeaway on this slide is that it's not just one department or person that can determine the risks with a third-party vendor.
Thanks, Troy. So here we are at our second polling question. What are some of the current risks of third-party cloud services? A, security is a concern when enterprises share storage space with other customers. B, there may not be physical indication of a security issue, such as no blinking lights. C, greater security may come at the expense of transparency, flexibility, and customization. Or D, all of the above. So I'm going to leave it open here for a few seconds. Okay, let's see what the results are. It looks like all you got it right. So 91.1% of you answered correctly, all of the above. And, if you think about all the different risk areas that Troy just talked about, there is some degree of control and visibility that's given up as you move your applications and data to cloud-based service providers. So, naturally security is going to be a concern if you're sharing your application instance or database instance with other customers of that cloud service provider. You're not going to have the visibility in or the monitoring controls at the ready, as if these applications and databases are at a cloud service provider. You're not going to have the same level of monitoring or visibility to those applications in a lot of cases. And then, greater security just comes at the expense of that transparency, the flexibility and the customization that you may enjoy with on-premise systems as opposed to using a set platform like a platform as a service provider. So there's some limitations there. So correct answer, again, D, all of the above in this case. So with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Troy.
All right, thanks, Kevin. So as we mentioned, we really need to evaluate the controls of these service providers. And one method of evaluating the controls is to obtain a statement on standards for attestation engagements, or an SSAE 16 report. SSAE 16 is being replaced with a newer standard called SSAE 18. These reports are similar to the old SAF 70 reports that you might have heard of. But now these reports are really called SOC 1, SOC 2, that's SOC. And SOC used to stand for Service Organization Controls, but now stands for System and Organization Controls under SSAE 18. These SOC for Service Organization reports are a good method to review the controls that are in place for a cloud provider. SOC 1 reports describe the controls at a service organization relevant to user entities' internal control over financial reporting. The purpose of these reports is to provide information to the auditor of an organization's financial statements about controls at the service provider that may be relevant to that organization's internal control over financial reporting. So SOC 1 reports will be used by cloud providers that host financial applications like NetSuite. That's a good example. SOC 2 reports describe the controls at a service organization relevant to security, availability, processing integrity, confidentiality, and/or privacy. The purpose of these reports is to provide information to the user of the service regarding the service provider's controls as they relate to these trust principles. SOC 2 reports will be done by most cloud providers as they provide better assurance of the controls than a SOC 1 report. Both reports contain an opinion by the auditing firm on the fairness of the presentation of the description of the service organization service, as well as the design and operating effectiveness of the controls. So they're good reports to actually take a look at and you gain some sort of assurance of what those controls are in place. However, these reports aren't the only things that can be done. Many service providers also perform payment card industry attestations if they process, transmit, or store payment card data, or they use the International Organization for Standardization, which is ISO 27001, which is a security management standard, or ISO 27017, cloud-specific control standards, as other methods to show their compliance and risk reporting, really to provide assurance of the controls implemented for their service. So those are other methods to do that. The Cloud Security Alliance has also created a Cloud Control Matrix, or a CCM, and it's another well-used way of evaluating controls at a cloud provider. The CCM was designed to provide fundamental security principles to guide vendors and to assist prospective customers in assessing the overall security risk of that cloud provider. The CCM is a good way for you as the user of the cloud service to perform a self-assessment of their controls. Let's talk a little bit more about the CCM. So the Cloud Security Alliance was created to define and raise awareness of best practices to help ensure a secure cloud computing environment. The best practices defined in the CCM are for the cloud provider as well as you, the user of that cloud provider service, to aid in assessing the overall security risks of a cloud provider. This is a good tool that can be used by your information security and compliance departments to assess existing or new cloud providers as part of your third-party risk management lifecycle. The current version of the CCM is version 3.0.1, and it was last updated in October 2016. You can think of the CCM as a controls framework with 16 domains that are tied to other industry-accepted security standards, regulations, and control frameworks to reduce audit complexity. In fact, the controls within the CCM have been mapped to the majority of the standards and regulations that are out there. The domains within the CCM include application and interface security, audit assurance, business continuity, change control, data security, human resources security, identity access management, and vulnerability and threat management, to name a few. So there's a number of them, and good controls under each of those domains. The CCM also delineates controls by architectural relevance, such as network, compute, storage, and by cloud service delivery models such as SaaS, PaaS, and IaaS. These help providers and the users of their service determine which controls should be evaluated based on the service being provided. The overarching goal of the CCM is to normalize security expectations, define cloud terminology, and provide best practices of the security measures that should be implemented in a cloud environment.
Okay, here we are at a third polling question. So for those of you that have moved some of your applications or systems to the cloud, have you assessed your vendors against the SOC criteria for third parties? So I'll leave this open for a little bit. Okay, let's see what the results are. Okay, so we have 45.4% of you had answered no. And then another 29% of you answered I don't know or not certain. So, as Troy mentioned earlier, the SOC audit report should be part of your due diligence process when evaluating cloud service providers, because it really provides that attestation or opinion of the design of controls that the cloud service provider has in place, as well as the operating effectiveness of those controls. So whether it's the SOC audit, which is the most common, you should actually do your due diligence by requesting these reports from your cloud service provider. So it could be a SOC report, it could be the ISO 27001 or 2717 report that Troy mentioned, but even better would be a report against assessing the provider against the Cloud Security Alliance CCM matrix. So all of those would be good things for you to review to make sure that the cloud service provider that you're considering or have considered are doing their part as far as ensuring your data is protected and your systems are secured. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Brandon.
Thank you, Kevin. Thinking about the CCM, many of the large cloud service providers such as Microsoft Azure and Amazon Web Services, Salesforce, a number of the large ones, and even some of the mid-range ones have completed this on their own, the Cloud Security Matrix. So you can actually go and look at how they've self-reported, self-assessed, as well as a lot of their supporting documentation. And as we look at how our role as information security and as an organization shifts, right, we can take that information and see how that matches up with our own internal standards that we have for the data that we may be placing in the cloud. Because our role as information security really hasn't changed much, right? We still have the responsibility to define the standards and help the organization ensure the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of data. We just have to understand what those standards are and where the delineation of risk resides for the organization, so that we can help teams such as vendor management and purchasing to ensure that they establish the correct relationships with the vendors so that our data is secure. And that this third party adheres to our internal standards and processes. We think about the importance of our legal team in purchasing and vendor management. Previous to the advent of the cloud, A lot of times we could simply rely on vendor management and purchasing to, from an IT and IT security perspective, to provide us with the contracting vehicle that provides us with the software or the tools that we need to use on premise, and their role was pretty much out of it once that support agreement was signed and the software agreement was signed. It was pretty much done. But as we look at this migration to the cloud, their role is shifting and changing. Vendor management programs have become much more extensive as they vet vendors from a cloud perspective. And a lot of this is to establish a relationship so that the standards that we want to have over our data are put in place. But understanding that the policies and procedures used by the third-party cloud provider are critical. We mentioned the Cloud Security Alliance earlier, and how several organizations such as Microsoft and Amazon have completed this for their cloud offerings. You can take a look at this, and they provide great detail on what their procedures are for doing patch management. However, patch management to the hardware of an infrastructure as a service fabric, such as Microsoft, Azure, or AWS, that still doesn't solve our patch management problem completely. It helps us understand what they're doing on the underlying hardware, but from our virtual device perspective, we still have a responsibility for managing the risks on our side. And once again, just mentioning, data owners and business process owners are often the front line, especially when you look at software as a service. They may be the only ones affecting security and applying the right policies to the data that they put into the cloud. And so it's very much important that they're aware of our security, of the security policies and procedures within the organization, because they may have little interaction with information security or IT as they go about their normal routine of working with our data. Looking at cybersecurity as just its own little subcomponent here, one of the things that is easy for organizations to do is to say, oh, it's up in the cloud. We've vetted our cloud service provider. We understand how they're taking care of our data, and it's easy to sit back and say, okay, we've taken care of it. But at the same time, that can lead us into a semblance of complacency. We need to be constantly thinking about what the risks are to our data, how our environments are changing, and exactly what those boundaries of our cloud-based solution are that we spoke of earlier, whether it's infrastructure as a service, where it requires more of cybersecurity's role in the environment. But the trick is to not become complacent towards the risk. Always know that it's out there, and always understand how your environment is changing, so that we understand new and emerging risks as we expand into the cloud. The last thing as well is in monitoring and managing, alerting, and understanding when security events and incidents are happening is always critical, whether you are a cloud service provider and you're using AWS, or whether you have an on-premise facility. Understanding the security events that are happening in your environment are critical, and that doesn't change with simply moving to the cloud. It may become more complex as you work with your cloud vendor, but you still have that responsibility to understand what the incidents are in your environment. As we look at additional points, we need to understand how to engage our cloud providers. One of the things that we do, we work with vendors to help them engage with their cloud service providers. With the vendor management teams, to help them engage with their cloud service providers, to help them get the information they need around management of security within the environment. The cloud control matrix is a great tool to help demand that type of transparency and visibility into the procedures of the organization that you may be contracting with. You know, one of the hardest things, and we've hit upon this topic a number of times here in this presentation, is the need to understand who is responsible for what aspects of information security and how we manage the risk. The security teams need to understand with precise clarity who owns what, so that there are no gaps in the security program. You know, cloud providers risks, as we talk about third-party risk management, we talk about the risks of moving to the cloud, we need to understand that these risks are enterprise risks. They affect all of us within the organization. And as Troy mentioned earlier, it takes many departments, many areas of the organization to help manage this risk. Right? Legal counsel, as never before, is being called upon to understand and get up to speed on the risks associated with moving to the cloud. It's incumbent upon them, as well as the purchasing and vendor management teams, to help vet our prospective cloud providers so that we can establish a great relationship with them, one that has a contracting vehicle that allows us to implement the security procedures and processes and standards that we've established for the data within our organization. If we as an organization set our data classifications and security mechanisms around the data to go a certain way, and then we contract with a cloud service provider that doesn't hold our similar values and standards, the law of minimum least resistance, right? We'll have a lack of we'll have a security gap based on that. But vendor management and purchasing has taken a much greater role. They've established programs to hold these third-party providers to contractual obligations on an ongoing basis. This is, as Troy mentioned, is through an assessment, periodic assessment process and periodic review process to understand, are you really living up to your expectation, the expectations that we have for you. Some of these tools, as Troy mentioned, are the SOC 1s and SOC 2 reports that are generated by these organizations, which establish a minimum baseline of security in place. But enterprise risk management also needs to get involved, right? This needs to be on their radar. This needs to be continually reviewed by them to help find the gaps within the organization, right? And guide the entire organization through this risk mitigation and management process. With that, we'll go into our next polling question.
Okay. Thanks, Brandon. So poll number 4. Departments impacted by the use of cloud and third-party providers now include which of the following? A, legal, B, internal audit, C, purchasing and vendor management, D, in-house security teams, E, data and business process owners, or F, all of the above. We'll give you a few seconds here. Okay, let's see what the poll results are. All right, so we got 97.1% of you answered correctly, all of the above. So if you think about this, the legal department, they need to be involved to ensure that the organization is meeting obligations to business partners and regulatory agencies by using cloud service providers. When you think about internal audit, when conducting control audits, internal audit needs to be considered the IT environment that is, in a lot of aspects, beyond the immediate management control of the organization. So when the organization is using cloud service providers, they now have to take into account the degree of risk that may be introduced by having systems and data in the cloud. So that's a tall order for internal audit. Purchasing and vendor management, as Brandon mentioned earlier, they're responsible for holding the cloud service provider to their contract obligations and making sure that they're meeting them on an ongoing basis. In-house security teams, they'll need to be involved with the initial due diligence process to make sure the necessary data protections and security measures have been implemented to not only ensure to not only secure sensitive data, but also to meet those legal and compliance obligations I mentioned earlier. And then lastly, those data and business process owners, they're going to need to be involved with just the overall security functionality and knowing how like access controls are managed within the cloud-based application, for example. And they also need to be more involved to ensure that the data remains available. So they're now dependent upon a separate entity to ensure that system and data redundancy measures are in place to offset any type of outage that may impact the availability of their critical business systems and data. So, those data and business process owners, they have a stake in the ground to make sure that the cloud service provider does have the necessary redundancy measures in place to make sure that those systems and data are indeed available at all times. And so with that, I'll turn it back over to Brandon.
Perfect. Thank you, Kevin. I think everybody's starting to get an understanding based on the polling results. Who needs to be involved in third-party risk management. What can we do as individuals? What can we do as organizations? Right. The first and biggest thing we need to do is we need to understand that acknowledge the risks. We need to understand that third-party risk management is not just an IT or an IT security problem. And I think the last polling slide kind of helps me understand that this group, I think, has got this. But we need to go back to our organizations and make sure that they understand that we each have a role in a responsibility for the data security and privacy of our data, and know what the responsibilities of the third parties actually are. Right? We need to take a look at our information security governance programs. Develop and bolster them. If we're not providing, if these have stagnated and we're not providing updated policies and procedures for a cloud environment, we need to take a look at our risk exposure and begin to develop those, right? And from a governance perspective, we need to know what data is actually going up there. Troy mentioned shadow IT. With software as a service, shadow IT often becomes a very easy mechanism to solve an immediate problem, but may not stand up to our security policies and procedures. And lastly, take a look at how we are monitoring and correlating events, right? Make sure that we can take security incidents and other types of related events and correlate them together. Many organizations are starting to invest in a SIEM solution to be able to help them with this coordination, right? So that we can look at the trending, look at the event correlation, and understand if we're really at risk or not. The other things we can do is we can bolster up our vendor management programs. Honestly, many of the vendor management programs that we encounter and the purchasing programs that we encounter are still struggling to figure out how to develop standards and relationships with these third-party cloud providers that can sustain the policies and procedures that we, as information security professionals or IT professionals, have put in place to secure our data. And we need to work with them to help them and the legal teams to understand what the risk is and shift the risk responsibility, this shift in risk and responsibility to them that they now have over the data, and help them with the regular audits and assessments. And this is an area where internal audit often helps out, where they will come and do an independent assessment of vendors to make sure that they're living up to our standards. But the last bullet is the most important one to me, the last major one. Be proactive and get ahead of the threats. We as information security professionals, information technology professionals, we need to be doing our own research, getting a better understanding individually so we can help our organizations plan and get ahead of these risks. When we start to hear rumblings within our organization of, oh, we want this application in the cloud, or we're doing this eventually down the line, this is where this product is heading, or so on and so forth, we can get out and ahead and say, we've done the research and we understand these are the players and these are some of the risks that we might encounter. And then lastly, consult with your peers and other industry specialists. This is a great way to look around and see what others are doing and how they have secured their data just by speaking with the people that you know. Looking at kind of the final thoughts and taking a step back, we've talked a lot about various types of third-party risks, risks associated with moving to the cloud, with working with co-location facilities and other types of things. These are often unique to cloud or outsourced solutions, and we need to understand that. And helping others within the organization understand that these are unique, and we need to step up and create programs and policies, procedures to work with that. Third-party risk management, including the management of cloud providers, is everyone's responsibility. I think we've hit that home enough. Being proactive, both from a vendor management and security monitoring perspective, will pay off for us in the long run, and oftentimes in the short run as well, as we start, to look at monitoring, look at how our cloud applications are performing, both from an operational as well as a security perspective. Some of the things that we've found as we moved through this migration to the cloud got a lot easier. Things like patch management, things like vulnerability management got a lot easier. When you start looking at software as a service, we no longer have to patch these servers. The underlying cloud provider does that for us, right? But other things got a little bit more complicated. When we start looking at infrastructure as a service and platform as a service, understanding where the lines of responsibility are clearly drawn for these critical security measures and clearly contractually defined. And the last point I would reiterate is, the best contract in the world is only a piece of paper if we don't hold our vendors accountable to those contracts. We need to look at what we've contracted with them for, ensure it aligns with our security policies and procedures, and then hold them accountable to hold up their end. There's no silver bullet to dealing with third-party risk management, especially when we're looking at a cloud, all right? And right-sizing and finding the best way to work within your organization and establish third-party risk management programs and processes is an entirely unique thing to your organization. But I encourage you to take a look at a lot of the things that we've discussed today and maybe weave them into your current processes. And with that, I think we'll turn it over to questions.
Thanks, Brandon. So let's just take time for one quick question. So Kathleen asks, what reports do third-party cloud services provide clients to show who has accessed and when?
Thanks, Tanya. I'll answer that. This is Troy. It depends would be the answer. Unfortunately, it all comes down to what that provider is doing. So like somebody like Dropbox, for example, a file sharing application, they've got good controls around getting reports out of the system as far as who has accessed a file or modified a file, and you can get those from them pretty easily. Others, it really kind of depends on their service, but being able to have these types of service or these reports should be part of your onboarding process with them, and really making sure that they can provide any of that type of information that you need to perform these regular audits against the files or the service or whatever you're looking for should be part of that whole onboarding process and part of your contracts.
Great, great. So if we haven't gotten to your questions yet, we will be sure and follow up with you outside of the presentation. So I'd like to thank Brandon, Troy, and Kevin. Thank you for a timely and insightful topic. We know cybersecurity and risk management remain at the forefront of your mind. So if you find you have questions outside of our broadcast, please contact our presenters directly. They're happy to talk to you. If you participated in today's webcast and met all certification requirements, a copy of your CPE certificate will be sent to you electronically within 2 weeks. And here is a link to a survey that really helps us do what we do and do it better. So please take a moment to complete the survey so we can improve and identify what topics matter most to you. So thank you, gentlemen, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Welcome to the Moss Adams presentation, IT You Can Use, Third-Party Cloud Risks. Before we get started, we have a few housekeeping items that will improve your participation.
Moss Adams is pleased to present another in our ongoing series of continuing professional education webcasts. Our presentation